Jake here with Bond Performance. Gonna knock out the Is38 install on my Mk7 Gti. As you just saw, I was doing an experiment. I spilled the coolant out so you guys could see. It takes about 3/4 of a roll of paper towel. Fluid capacity, if you're wondering on the exact measurement on that. So, my bad, knocked my bucket over. But we're gonna get up in here and pull this turb ski out and do a little upgrading. So I'm gonna get what I can from down here and then drop it down and start pulling some things from up top. And I'll update you in a few minutes. Alright, I've got everything as disconnected as I can from underneath, I believe. Got all the nuts cracked loose on the turbo. The wastegate connectors undone. Got the T30 off the coolant return line. SCP sent new studs, so no big deal. One of the studs came out, one nut came off. The top ones are loose. The turbo support brackets out of the way. I also took off the heat shield for the drive shaft just to have better visibility. So if you have a performance pack or an R, you'd have a lot less access here, but pretty straightforward. I'm going to drop the car down and see if I can get this coolant return line off, and then it'll be ready to come out. Alright, so a little pry bar and a M6 Allen, and that is loose. Got the feed line disconnected there, oil line from the top. And it's about ready to come off. The only thing left is the oil line at the bottom. Let me throw the car back up in the air and grab that real quick. But the my APR inlet I got for free, thanks Evan. The fitting that holds the PCV port on actually pulled apart. It was just a press fit, so it actually came apart easier than where it's supposed to come apart. I didn't take this all the way off. The coolant line that kind of routes across the top of the engine. I've got the harness just folded out of the way. My intake and turbo outlet pipe out of the way. So let me go grab that last oil line and see how much coolant mess I'm making for the second time. Alright, it is out. So I ended up removing the exhaust cam solenoids. It's a single T25, and those are just kind of a press fit with an O-ring. That way I had room to actually get the turbo out past the firewall. I picked the car up and loosened the dog bone, but because I have the BFI Stage 2 mounts, that was a lost cause. There's no wiggle room to be had, which is a good thing performance-wise. So, here's the cam solenoids. I clean those up and reinstall them as soon as the new turbo's in to make sure I don't knock any debris down in to the cylinder head. Oh, also pulled the ignition coils out. I'll be swapping in some spark plugs. I normally run RS7 Baru plugs, but Denso came with the Is38 from FCP, so I'm going to give them a try. So, I'm shaky, but not a huge difference. I already started, just as I was working, putting the hardware where it belongs, so I don't get anything confused. I'm guessing that oil drain line is the one that people say they have trouble with on removal. I just used the casting for the wastegate actuator as a leverage point with that short pry bar you saw earlier. Let me grab it. This guy right here. And that was perfect leverage to just pop that off of there. So I'm gonna clean up in the engine bay a little bit, switch some O-rings around, pull this line off and install it on the Is38, and then it's time to put it back in. Also need to grab the O2 sensor, which I haven't removed that on the car, so I'll probably reinstall it once the turbo's on the car too, just to make sure I don't damage it. Oh, and I've got one stud to replace. The guy right there. Figured I'd show you guys this real quick if you've never done it, how to install a stud. You put two nuts on the stud and jam them on the side you want out. This has an E on one side, which I'm assuming that means towards the engine, since the other side just has a block. Get it started by hand. Put your wrench on the outermost nut, and we'll drive it in. Then you just grab a second wrench to break it free when you're done. That way the stud stays in there, nuts come off. I just broke these loose. There you go, new stud installed. Okay, so everything's together. My new GE SI EPA approved catted downpipe is on, Is38's on. Everything's all buttoned up. The only thing left to do is tighten the V-band on the downpipe. And I left the high pressure fuel pump connector off. So I plan to crank the engine over without starting it to put some oil pressure through the turbo. Now, I manually dumped some oil in through the top. I don't really know how much difference that makes. It's kind of probably not really worth the mess, especially if you're gonna pre-oil it with oil pressure. But I went ahead and did that and made a mess on top of all my coolant messes today. But overall, everything went smooth. There's no extra parts left over. Really, for me, the hardest part, which still wasn't a big deal, just kind of a puzzle, was figuring out which way the turbo fits between the cylinder head and the firewall. But again, just trial and error, and got that taken care of. So here's a view from the top. That American made right here in South Carolina, V2 catted downpipe. Got my engine intake back on, the free Mishimoto charge pipes from the last video. Harness is all back together, new Denso plugs. I'm not sure about those, we're gonna try them. Oh yeah, one last thing, I have to mix up some coolant and top that off Left the cap off on purpose as a reminder, but this is a connector I'm talking about. It shouldn't start without the high pressure fuel pump. So I'll button this up and we'll get a video of that. Alright, so I topped it off with coolant, left the cap off so it can let the air out. I cranked it for about 15 seconds with the fuel pump disconnected, so aggressive turbo back exhaust. Coolant level's coming down. I'm gonna stop and top that off a bit. So I'm not being super scientific about this. I'm just filling the solo cup up to the top line, alternating between straight water and straight coolant. According to IHI in the operator's manual, they want you to run it idle for 10 minutes to make sure the bearings in the turbo are properly lubricated. And you can probably see just a little bit of smoke coming off. That's probably a little combination of cut-in fluid from building the downpipe, the coolant from my saw, and the oil that I spilled through oil in the turbo earlier. No leaks that I can see. So that smoke will dissipate on its own eventually. Once whatever residue's on there burns off. So the coolant's dropping just a little bit. Well, it's not making any horrible sounds. So I guess we did something right. There's no trail of smoke. And I've got an appointment tomorrow at noon to get it tuned so I can actually get on it. I have a feeling that getting into boost on the IS-20 Stage 2 tune probably isn't a good idea.